The Montecito hills were unusually quiet that morning, but not the type of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind of quiet that signals something has ended, something irreversible. The humming of moving vans pierced the calm air, their engines grumbling against the gravel driveway of the now iconic estate once called home by one of the world's most talked-about couples. Uniformed movers carried out box after box, wrapped furniture, paintings, and decor. But what struck bystanders and paparazzi most wasn't the flurry of cardboard and tape. It was the conspicuous absence of one man. Prince Harry. Only Meghan Markle was seen stepping in and out of the house. Hair tied in a low, functional ponytail. Her usual Hollywood polish was absent. No glam squad. No entourage. Just her, a clipboard in hand, directing movers like someone trying to maintain control while her world shifted underneath her feet. She looked every bit like a woman determined to start over. But also, if you looked closely enough, like someone doing so with a knot in her stomach. No wedding ring. No sign of Harry. No Archie. No Lilibet. Just the noise of transition and the deafening silence of speculation. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The moment was caught in photographs that rocketed across social media. Every outlet from TMZ to The Telegraph published headlines that danced around the truth, until the public began to connect the dots. Had Meghan moved out alone? Was this just a temporary step for a new project, or was something deeper unfolding behind palace-strength privacy gates? Had their relationship, the whirlwind fairy tale that defied tradition, broke centuries-old barriers, and polarized the world, finally come to an end? You see, no matter which side of the royal fence you sit on, whether you see Meghan as a modern heroine or a manipulative outsider, there's no denying the magnitude of what this move could mean. It wasn't just a change of address. It was symbolic. This mansion wasn't just a property. It was their sanctuary, their escape from royal scrutiny, their castle, reimagined under the California sun. Selling it, and doing so without fanfare or shared presence, felt like a loud whisper that something had shattered. But this story isn't about a real estate listing. It's about a crumbling foundation far less visible than marble countertops or ocean views. It's about how something that once symbolized rebellion and liberation, their departure from royal life, might now be revealing deeper fractures, unmet expectations, emotional fatigue, disillusionment, and diverging dreams. This story is about what happens after the headlines fade, after the glamour of new beginnings wears off, and after two people who risked everything for each other start to drift apart. The past few years have been nothing short of a high-wire act for Meghan and Harry. From stepping back from royal duties and facing international backlash, to explosive interviews, book deals, and multi-million-dollar contracts, they've tried to carve out a life outside of the monarchy and inside a world that rewards visibility but punishes vulnerability. Every step they've taken has invited judgment, praise, and often confusion. But even as they curated brand partnerships, spoke about mental health, and navigated lawsuits, the one thing that remained, at least on the surface, was their unity. That's why this move sent shockwaves. How did it come to this? What pushed Meghan to pack up alone? Where was Harry? And perhaps the hardest question of all, was love simply not enough? In the chapters to come, we will peel back the layers of this unraveling. From the subtle signs of marital discord, to the quiet exit from a dream home, to the whispered arguments neighbors claim to overhear late into the night. We will explore the emotional price of royal exile, the impossible standards of reinvention, and the weight of being symbols before being spouses. Through media reports, public statements, insider accounts, and unspoken clues, we'll piece together the timeline that led to this pivotal moment. We'll examine the strategic sale of their Montecito property, what it reveals about their financial and emotional realities. We'll look at Meghan's new home, not just the address, but what it symbolizes: independence, control, or retreat. We'll analyze Harry's growing distance from Hollywood and his reported longing for a simpler, more grounded existence, one possibly rooted in the UK. And of course, we'll address what's at stake for their two children, Archie and Lilibet, who now sit at the center of a potential divide between two continents and two vastly different worlds. But this isn't just a story about two people falling out of love. It's about the fragility of human connection in the face of pressure, power, and public opinion. It's about how even the most glamorous escapes can come with hidden costs. It's about the choices we make when we feel trapped and the truths we reveal when no one is supposed to be watching. What makes this moment different, more haunting than previous rumors, is its quietness. There was no public statement, no denial, no carefully scripted podcast episode to steer the narrative. Just cardboard boxes, a sold sign, and one half of the Sussex brand on the move. If this were merely a business move or a vacation reset, wouldn't Harry have been there? Wouldn't there have been the usual signs of spin, or at the very least, solidarity? Instead, we are left with questions, not just about their marriage, but about identity, legacy, and love. About how two people who started off as rebels hand in hand might now be walking separate roads. About whether the very independence they sought has become the wedge that divided them. Still, there are no easy answers. What we do know is that change is here. It isn't whispered anymore. It's being boxed up, loaded into vans, and driven away from the house that once held the promise of freedom and togetherness. By the end of this journey, you'll see just how deep the cracks ran beneath the polished surface. You'll understand why this move may not just signal a new chapter, but the end of a shared story. You'll witness the unraveling, not as gossip, but as the deeply human tale of what happens when love, ambition, pain, and pressure collide. So, before we begin, ask yourself, what would you do if the dream you sacrificed everything for began to unravel before your eyes? If your partner's idea of freedom felt more like a cage to you? If the very home you built together no longer felt like home at all? This is the story of Meghan Markle, packing up, moving on, and perhaps finally walking away. This is the story of a marriage tested not just by tabloids, but by time. And it all begins with a sold sign. Montecito had always been known for its elegance, its sun-drenched cliffs, and the ocean breeze that whispered wealth through every palm tree and hedgerow. But in 2020, it became something more. It became a refuge, a place where two of the world's most famous and polarizing figures planted a new flag far away from Buckingham Palace. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry purchased their $14.65 million Montecito mansion, it wasn't just a real estate investment, it was a statement. A bold declaration that they were breaking free from the centuries-old chains of royal tradition to forge a new identity. That 16-bathroom, 9-bedroom estate was meant to be their sanctuary, surrounded by ancient olive trees, equipped with a rose garden, tennis court, and a chicken coop for Archie to grow up with animals. This was supposed to be the place where wounds would heal and dreams would come true. But now, as the property has reportedly been sold and moving vans have cleared the last box from the driveway, the facade of peace has crumbled. What was once a castle for two looks more like the ruins of a once promising future. The end of the Montecito era wasn't just about property lines or tax records. It marked the slow erosion of something far more intimate, their shared vision. And to understand the gravity of the home sale, we have to go back to when it all began. In July 2020, amid a world reshaped by lockdowns and uncertainty, Harry and Meghan quietly purchased the estate. There was no press conference, no royal approval. It was a sharp contrast to their life in the UK, a world where every square foot they occupied belonged to the crown and the taxpayers. For the first time, they were homeowners in the truest sense, independent, self-funded, and free to curate a space entirely for themselves. But what did that freedom really cost? At first, Montecito offered everything they needed: privacy, distance from the frenzy of Los Angeles, and a welcoming community that embraced their unconventional journey. Oprah Winfrey lived nearby. So did Ellen DeGeneres. The Sussexes had entered a world where fame was currency, but where the rules of monarchy didn't apply. Inside the sprawling 14,500 square foot home, they could raise their children without camera flashes. They could record podcasts and take Zoom calls for Archwell without bowing to palace traditions. But the home wasn't just a symbol of their American chapter. It was part of a larger brand pivot. The couple needed to project stability, success, and domestic bliss to an audience that was increasingly divided over their public image. The Montecito mansion featured in the background of carefully curated video calls and social media campaigns. Its arched windows, manicured hedges, and rustic wood beams all painted the picture of royal escape done right. Yet behind the scenes, the cracks had already begun to show. Reports began surfacing in late 2022 of increasing tensions between the couple, not necessarily explosive fights, but rather the kind of deep incompatibility that grows over time. Harry's memoir, Spare, although wildly successful, opened up wounds that had never healed. His admissions about drug use, his pain over Diana's death, his animosity toward the institution. All of it brought a flood of media attention back into their lives. And while Meghan had championed transparency and authenticity, there was something about Harry's rawness that seemed unfiltered in a way she hadn't anticipated. Insiders quietly whispered about differing goals. Meghan, always strategic and media-savvy, wanted to build an empire, fashion lines, production deals, podcasts, and maybe even a political future. Harry, meanwhile, seemed to crave something quieter. There were whispers that he missed the military camaraderie, that he longed for connection with old friends and his home country. Even as they stood side by side on red carpets, their eyes seemed to look in different directions. And then came the financial strain. Despite multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, the couple found themselves under increasing pressure to produce content that lived up to the hype. Their Spotify deal came to an abrupt end, leaving some questioning their long-term commercial viability. While Harry and Meghan on Netflix drew enormous viewership, critics noted a sense of fatigue in the storytelling. There was only so much royal drama audiences would consume. Behind the curtain, sources claimed the couple was reassessing their expenditures, and Montecito, with its astronomical maintenance costs, became an obvious point of scrutiny. According to local real estate reports, the property had been quietly listed off-market. This wasn't a flashy public sale. It was discreet, surgical. It had all the markings of a strategic move or a silent unraveling. Within weeks, the mansion was reportedly sold to an undisclosed buyer. No photo shoots, no goodbyes, no social media farewell post thanking Montecito for all the memories. Just a closing of doors, both literal and symbolic. And then came the moving vans. Onlookers described the scene with a mix of curiosity and concern. It wasn't the celebratory kind of move, the one that comes with smiles and laughter and hopeful glances toward the future. Meghan was said to be focused, brisk, even tense. No Harry, no shared hugs, just logistics. The mood was clinical, transactional. This moment set off a wave of speculation. Was this a downsizing move to better manage their finances? Or was this something deeper, an indication that their time as a couple had passed its peak? As real estate experts began digging, rumors surfaced that Meghan had signed a separate lease under her own name. A smaller property in a different part of California. Cozy, private, not fit for a royal family, but perfect for a woman starting over. To the public, it felt jarring. Hadn't they just settled? Hadn't this house been their forever home? But homes are only as strong as the people who inhabit them. And for Meghan and Harry, it seemed the emotional foundation that once held everything together had shifted. Maybe it was the pressure of being public figures without a firm base of support. Maybe it was the weight of expectations, constantly fighting on two fronts, against the British press and against American skepticism. Or maybe it was simply that they had grown apart in a house too big to hold their growing distance. When we look at this moment, the end of the Montecito chapter, it's easy to get caught in the glamour or the scandal. But at its core, this was about two people who once risked everything for a shared dream and who may now be waking up with different definitions of success, fulfillment, and freedom. This is the danger of building a kingdom on sand. The Montecito mansion, for all its grandeur, could never insulate them from the emotional tremors rumbling underneath. And when those tremors became quakes, it was only a matter of time before walls, literal and metaphorical, began to fall. And now that they have, the question becomes, what's next? Has Meghan truly walked away? Or is this simply a calculated separation, emotional distance masked as logistical necessity? Has Harry consented to the sale? Or is he still holding on to the hope of reconciliation? Did the dream house become a tomb for something that could never survive the spotlight? We don't yet know the full truth. But what we do know is that the home is gone. The chapter is closed. And whatever comes next will no longer happen in the shadow of that Montecito mansion. That home was once a symbol of their freedom. Today, it's a ghost of a promise that couldn't be kept. The headlines began quietly at first. A few grainy paparazzi shots. A blurry video clip posted to a gossip blog. A social media user claiming they saw Meghan supervising movers alone. But as more images surfaced and more details were quietly confirmed, it became impossible to ignore the one glaring absence in all of it: Prince Harry. Meghan Markle was moving out of their Montecito home. That much was clear. Movers could be seen transporting boxes and furniture, the estate's signature wrought iron gates occasionally swinging open to let trucks in and out. But despite the scale of the operation, despite the fact that this was the couple's primary residence, their supposed family haven, Harry was nowhere to be seen. Not once. Not even in the background. Not in a passing car. Not in the form of a statement. Just silence. And that silence was louder than any press release could ever be. It didn't take long before speculation began to snowball. Where was he? Why wasn't he helping his wife oversee the move? Had he left already? Or was he intentionally staying away? Was this a coordinated decision? Or had things gone so cold between them that communication had stopped altogether? For a couple who had built an entire post-royal identity on togetherness, this visual, or more accurately, this void, was jarring. From their bombshell Oprah interview to their joint ventures under Archewell, Harry and Meghan had always moved as a unit. Even when criticized, even when facing lawsuits or media scrutiny, they presented a united front. So this new development, this solo move by Meghan, struck a nerve with the public in a way few other moments had. To understand the weight of Harry's absence, we need to remember what he represents. For many, Harry is the emotional core of the couple, the one who sacrificed the most, a prince who left behind a title, a country, a family legacy, for love. His love story was the fuel that made the public take sides, invest emotionally, and root for or against them. And now, suddenly, that love story looked fractured, not through scandal or betrayal, but through absence. Absence speaks volumes. And in this case, it whispered something deeply unsettling. Perhaps Harry was no longer part of Meghan's next chapter. It's important to note that Harry was last publicly seen in the U.S. days before the move, attending a charity polo match, smiling but tired, according to spectators. There were murmurs that he had returned to the UK shortly afterward for undisclosed meetings, perhaps tied to ongoing legal cases or quiet discussions with the royal family. But even that wasn't confirmed. His location had become a mystery, and in the world of celebrity, that's often a clue all its own. There are two major possibilities that emerged from his disappearance during the move. The first, Harry was deliberately distancing himself from Meghan's new beginning. Perhaps they had mutually agreed to separate, and this move was a symbolic dividing line, a physical relocation to mirror an emotional one. If true, it would explain the clean break, the efficient logistics, and the lack of public drama. In many ways, it would be the most mature route, a quiet end to a highly public union. But it would also be a deeply heartbreaking one, especially considering everything they had been through together. The second possibility was even more complex. Harry wasn't just absent from the move. He was resisting it. Some reports hinted at behind-the-scenes disagreement over the sale of the Montecito home. That Harry had wanted to hold on to the property, at least for the sake of the children. That he believed it was still possible to rebuild, to reconnect, and that letting go of their home meant letting go of something bigger than bricks and mortar. This theory suggested a more fractured dynamic, not mutual separation, but emotional divergence. Meghan moving forward, Harry holding back, not out of anger, but out of hope, and in a strange, painful way that made the situation even more tragic. The public response to Harry's absence was immediate and polarized. On social media, hashtags like #WhereIsHarry and #SussexSplit began trending within hours. Royal commentators on both sides of the Atlantic began dissecting body language from their last public appearance together. TikTok was flooded with conspiracy theories, some absurd, some chillingly plausible. One viral thread pointed out that Harry had recently appeared increasingly subdued in public. His interviews had become shorter, his tone more somber, a far cry from the hopeful, almost defiant energy he carried when first arriving in California. Some suggested he looked lost, even depressed. That behind the polished smiles, he was quietly battling something more profound, the loss of identity, purpose, and perhaps connection. Others blamed Meghan, accusing her of pushing him away, of chasing fame while he craved privacy. These critics claimed she had gotten what she wanted: notoriety, deals, a platform, and now no longer needed the man who helped her get there. But that perspective, though popular in some circles, oversimplified a far more nuanced truth. Because the reality is, both Harry and Meghan have been walking a tightrope for years, balancing love and loyalty, ambition and responsibility, legacy and independence. And sometimes, when two people are holding on too tightly to opposite ends of that rope, the only outcome is a fall. Harry's absence also raised deeper questions about his role in Meghan's evolving life. She had rebranded herself in many ways: a woman of the media, a producer, a mother, a possible future political voice. And yet, Harry seemed increasingly like a shadow. Supportive, yes, but no longer central. Was he okay with that? Or had he quietly begun to fade out of the narrative? Some sources close to the couple, speaking anonymously, hinted that Harry had become overwhelmed by the pace of their post-royal life. That the Hollywood environment, its constant demands, its transactional nature, didn't sit well with him. That he missed structure, simplicity, friends who didn't need NDAs. A world where his every move wasn't part of a larger media machine. One particularly telling anecdote came from a journalist who had attended an event with the couple months prior. According to the account, Harry spent most of the evening quietly in the corner, chatting with staffers and avoiding cameras. Meghan, meanwhile, worked the room with the finesse of a seasoned public figure. It wasn't a scandalous moment, but it was revealing. They were moving in different rhythms, not antagonistically, just differently. And perhaps that's the core of what Harry's absence during the move symbolizes. Not necessarily conflict, but disconnection. Even within the most loving partnerships, people evolve. Sometimes in tandem, sometimes apart. And in Harry and Meghan's case, their evolution was accelerated by trauma, by expectation, by a level of scrutiny few couples have ever known. They were no longer just Harry and Meghan. They were brands, icons, symbols of rebellion and resilience. And when your life becomes a story told by millions, it becomes harder to live it authentically. So when Meghan packed up and moved alone, she wasn't just relocating. She was making a statement, consciously or not, that she was ready to move forward, that she had a plan, that whatever came next, she would face it on her terms. And Harry, by not being there, made his own quiet statement, one that could mean grief, or resistance, or retreat. But whatever it meant, it was unmistakably real. This chapter in their story isn't just about a missing prince. It's about how absence reveals truths that presence can sometimes hide. It's about how silence can echo louder than words. And it's about how even the strongest love stories can bend under the weight of change. As the world continues to speculate, one thing is certain: Prince Harry's absence during the move wasn't an oversight. It was a clue, a sign, perhaps even a cry for space. What comes next? Whether reconciliation, reinvention, or final separation remains unseen. But for now, all we have is the image of Meghan, standing alone at the edge of a mansion she once called home, and a question that still haunts the quiet streets of Montecito. Where's Harry? Before the headlines, before the moving vans, before the silence that echoed louder than words, there were the signs. Subtle, often overlooked, but undeniably present. The kind of clues that don't make front-page news until hindsight exposes them in vivid clarity. The truth is, long before Meghan Markle packed up the Montecito mansion without Prince Harry, their once seemingly unshakable partnership had already begun to fracture behind the estate's ivy-covered walls. The public just hadn't been allowed to see it. This was not the story of a sudden break. It was the slow erosion of intimacy. A house divided not by rage or scandal, but by the accumulation of unresolved tension, unmet needs, and the growing chasm between two different visions of what life after royalty should be. From the outside, their lives appeared curated to perfection. Public appearances were timed, social media posts felt coordinated, and every photograph captured a semblance of harmony. But behind closed doors, according to those close to the couple, the energy inside the mansion had shifted. It began with the small things: separate rooms used more often, different routines. Meghan waking earlier to coordinate with her agents and publicists in Los Angeles, while Harry preferred quiet mornings in the garden with Archie. She would retreat into calls with Netflix executives, stylists, and lawyers. He would immerse himself in nonprofit work or take long solo walks around the property. These were not acts of hostility, but of drift. According to one anonymous staff member who left the household early in 2023, the couple had started living almost like business partners. They were polite, respectful, but you didn't feel warmth anymore, the source recalled. It was like everything had a purpose, a goal, a brand angle. There weren't spontaneous moments. It's a common arc in relationships strained by fame. The pressure to perform unity eventually outpaces the unity itself. But in Harry and Meghan's case, the stakes were higher. Their image, their business empire, even their moral message depended on togetherness. To admit division was to admit fragility, and that, in their world, was dangerous. The tension was compounded by differing professional ambitions. Meghan's re-entry into the Hollywood ecosystem required energy, charisma, and constant visibility. She had reactivated connections with producers, fashion icons, and executives, often flying solo to networking events. Harry, meanwhile, remained grounded in advocacy work that required less glitz and more grit. Veterans, mental health initiatives, and small-scale engagements filled his calendar. He reportedly resented the performative aspects of their public life and had grown weary of being part of a narrative machine. Insiders described a particularly uncomfortable scene during a gala in early 2023. Meghan was radiant, posing confidently on the red carpet, giving interviews, and catching up with Hollywood friends. Harry stood off to the side, awkward and visibly disengaged. A viral clip even showed him glancing toward the exit repeatedly, a moment dissected by media as evidence of his discomfort in her world. That video, while short, became symbolic of a growing truth. Their worlds were no longer aligned. At home, disagreements became more frequent. Not the explosive, dramatic rose tabloids often love to exaggerate, but persistent, weary debates about the future. Where should they raise the children long-term? Should they remain in the US or split time with the UK? Was their brand doing more harm than good to their mental health? Harry, reportedly, became more withdrawn during these conversations. Meghan, according to close associates, became more determined. And there was another source of strain that the public rarely talks about: isolation. For all their fame and fortune, the Sussexes lived in a kind of social vacuum, cut off from the royal family, estranged from many in the UK, and surrounded by an American elite that, while friendly, often treated them as anomalies rather than equals. True, Oprah was a neighbor. So was Ellen. But relationships built on fame are rarely built to last. According to one former friend of Meghan's, the couple spent more time alone in their sprawling home than most realized. It wasn't the social whirlwind people think. It was a lot of them, alone, trying to figure things out, and eventually, growing apart. Even parenting became a source of divergence. Meghan, meticulous and protective, leaned heavily into schedules, tutors, organic meals, and carefully structured routines. Harry, by contrast, often wanted more spontaneity: hiking trips, impromptu beach visits, time in nature. These differing philosophies didn't always lead to arguments, but they did contribute to a subtle disconnect in how they approached their family life. Then came the pressure of public expectation. Every time Harry or Meghan stepped outside, every word they uttered was dissected by millions. The pressure to get it right, to be inspiring, brave, likable, unshakable, became suffocating. And slowly, that pressure began to seep into their personal space. The home that was meant to be their fortress of peace began to feel more like a performance stage. Friends close to Harry revealed that he began expressing a longing for the UK. Not the palace, not the titles or the media, but the familiarity of his old life. The friends he left behind. The simple rituals of a morning walk in Windsor. A pint at a countryside pub. A visit to his mother's resting place without photographers hiding in hedges. These weren't signs of regret necessarily, but they were signs of emotional fatigue. For Meghan, the equation was different. She had already cut ties with most of her past life. Her future, her identity, was now rooted in her post-royal brand. She was building something she could control, and the Montecito house had been the backdrop of that transformation. But if that house had become a prison for Harry, then perhaps it was no longer a home at all. Sources say that by mid-2023, the couple had effectively created zones within the mansion, areas of work, areas of rest, and areas that were, in effect, separate. The idea was logistical at first, but over time it became emotional. The house became divided not just by walls, but by emotional boundaries. And that is perhaps the most devastating part of this chapter. Not that they were angry, but that they had stopped leaning on each other. Even publicists noticed the shift. Inquiries began to be answered separately. Event invitations were issued to Meghan alone, or to Harry with the vague disclaimer, +1. Their names, once spoken in a single breath, began to appear independently in newsrooms and booking sheets. Behind the scenes, it seemed even their professional teams were beginning to prepare for a separation of more than just physical spaces. Still, no official word came. No announcement. No confirmation. Just silence, coupled with imagery that became harder and harder to ignore. A telling moment occurred during a charity Zoom call late in the year. Meghan appeared polished and enthusiastic, addressing women entrepreneurs and thanking them for their work. When asked about Harry, she smiled briefly, then shifted the conversation. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But fans noticed. For a woman who once spoke passionately about their shared mission, that omission felt deafening. And now, with Meghan having packed and left the Montecito mansion alone, it seems that the house, once a symbol of their bold, defiant union, became the final mirror of their emotional landscape. Grand, but empty. Shared, but silent. A house divided. This chapter isn't about a fight. It's about what happens when two people begin moving in different directions without realizing how far they've gone. It's about how fame can magnify the cracks that most couples can ignore. And it's about how even a love forged in rebellion can succumb to the quiet erosion of emotional distance. Because behind every perfect photograph is a private life. And sometimes, no matter how beautiful the setting, a house can no longer hold what it was built to protect. From the moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped down from royal duties and made their way across the Atlantic, their lives became a tightly choreographed act of unity. A couple in lockstep, walking away from tradition to carve out a new identity. Theirs was a bond forged in fire, tested by relentless press attacks and public scrutiny. But beneath that fiercely unified front lay individual ambitions, identities, and dreams that, over time, started moving in different directions. At first glance, their post-royal life appeared seamless. They launched Archewell, appeared in joint interviews, and emphasized their shared mission. But in reality, the alignment that had once defined their every move began to splinter. The carefully constructed image of a partnership, not just in marriage, but in purpose, started to unravel. The signs of divergence were subtle, then glaring, and finally, impossible to ignore. The beginning of that divergence was marked by a shift in their public schedules. Where once they were inseparable, attending every public appearance side by side, gradually, they began showing up alone. Meghan would attend women-focused conferences in New York or creative business summits in Los Angeles. Harry would appear at events focused on mental health, veterans affairs, or environmental causes. At first, it was chalked up to efficiency, a strategic way to reach more audiences. But the pattern became persistent. More solo engagements, fewer shared red carpets, diminishing moments of visible togetherness. One notable moment came during a celebrity fundraiser in Beverly Hills. Meghan walked the red carpet alone, radiant in a designer gown, flashing a confident smile as paparazzi shouted her name. When asked about Harry, she gave a quick nod, then shifted the conversation to the event's mission. Later that night, Harry arrived through a side entrance and skipped all press. They were both at the same event for the same cause, yet the way they engaged with it, and with each other, was startlingly separate. That evening became the subject of online debate. Why did they arrive separately? Why didn't they pose together? Was this calculated PR or a reflection of deeper disconnection? And more importantly, why weren't they trying to quash the rumors? Their respective professional goals only widened the gap. Meghan was laying the groundwork for a new kind of public figure, part media mogul, part lifestyle authority, and possibly even a political advocate. She took meetings with major streaming platforms, fashion houses, and even political organizations. Insiders say she began building her own advisory team, people focused solely on her brand, and her trajectory. Harry, by contrast, seemed increasingly introspective. His Netflix docuseries may have performed well in numbers, but he was reportedly exhausted by the publicity cycle. Friends close to him described a man yearning for simplicity, someone who had fought the institution only to find himself caught in another system, one fueled by clicks, contracts, and brand partnerships. He began spending more time outside of California, visiting friends in Colorado, appearing solo in the UK, or retreating into quiet causes with less media glare. There was an unmistakable shift in energy. Meghan became more visible. Harry became less so. One source who worked closely with them described it like this. They were like two stars in the same galaxy, orbiting each other but not touching anymore. Both bright, both powerful, but on different paths. Even their domestic life, once a sanctuary from external pressures, began to reflect their growing divide. According to reports from those who frequented the estate, it wasn't uncommon for Meghan to have visitors, stylists, PR advisors, girlfriends from Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Harry was said to prefer quiet evenings, often spent outdoors with the children or in long calls with UK-based contacts. Their rhythms no longer aligned. Their conversations reportedly became more transactional, less about dreaming and more about managing. The world had long viewed them as co-authors of a radical royal exit. But as time wore on, it became clear that they were now writing separate chapters. Meghan's ambitions were ascending, her focus sharp and forward-facing. Harry, meanwhile, was dealing with the fallout of stepping so far away from a life he hadn't fully stopped mourning. Even their tone in public interviews changed. Meghan spoke with certainty and conviction, often laying out visions for the future. Harry's words began to carry more uncertainty, moments of hesitation, nostalgia, and in some cases, loneliness. During one appearance at a mental health summit, he spoke candidly about isolation, identity loss, and the emotional cost of fame. The crowd applauded his vulnerability, but many noticed what he didn't say. There were no mentions of his wife, no reflections on shared growth. It felt personal, separate. Speculation reached a fever pitch after an event in London, where Harry attended without Meghan. It wasn't just that she didn't accompany him. It was that no explanation was offered. No scheduling conflict. No illness. Just absence. For a couple who had previously made statements correcting the smallest media inaccuracy, this silence spoke volumes. More telling than their public appearances were the choices they made behind the scenes. Rumors emerged that Meghan had begun house hunting alone months before the Montecito property was listed. A second residence, more urban, more connected to the Los Angeles industry ecosystem, she was re-entering. Not necessarily a marital split, but a logistical adjustment that gave her more autonomy. Harry, meanwhile, was reportedly considering a UK-based residence of his own. Something modest, closer to his roots. There was no scandal, no betrayal, just two people quietly drifting. And perhaps that's what makes this chapter so painful. Because for all the drama the media once projected onto them, family feuds, tabloid battles, royal exits, the end of their fairy tale didn't come with explosive headlines. It came with separation by silence, by space, by different values and visions. Their relationship had once been a symbol of defiance, proof that love could conquer institutions. But now, it had become something far more human. Proof that even great love can be reshaped by time, pressure, and differing dreams. Those who knew them personally say that beneath the tension, there was no hatred, just exhaustion, respect, but also resignation, and a growing understanding that perhaps the world they had tried to build together no longer fit them both. In many ways, this is a story as old as time. Two people who met during a storm, clung to each other to survive it, and eventually realized that survival isn't the same as fulfillment. That what brings people together isn't always what keeps them together. And for Harry and Meghan, who had already lost so much, family, public favor, stability, the prospect of losing each other might have been too heavy to face head-on. So instead, they moved apart quietly, deliberately, slowly. The fairy tale, it seems, cracked not because of betrayal, but because of reality. And that is perhaps the most relatable part of all. The Montecito mansion was never supposed to be temporary. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle moved in, the estate represented their fresh start, the beginning of a life on their own terms, outside palace walls, outside relentless scrutiny. For a while, that dream seemed to hold. They built a life there. But as moving vans rolled out of the estate's long driveway and the property exchanged hands, the dream faded into something else. Something quieter, less romantic, more personal. As Meghan oversaw the final stages of the move, alone, the question on everyone's mind was simple. Where is she going? Rumors swirled for weeks. A townhouse in West Hollywood. A beachside bungalow in Malibu. An urban compound tucked away in Studio City. Speculation intensified not just because of where she might be going, but because of what her new residence could mean. Was this a calculated reset? A temporary relocation? Or was this the soft launch of a life apart? Eventually, details began to emerge. Meghan had quietly moved into a smaller, more modern property in an upscale neighborhood closer to central Los Angeles. The house, estimated at a little over $5 million, modest by Sussex standards, was sleek, secure, and highly private. It sat at the end of a gated cul-de-sac with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, minimalist architecture, and proximity to both business hubs and schools. Not a fortress like Montecito, but still highly exclusive. A perfect blend of accessibility and protection. But it wasn't the price tag or the decor that caught the attention of observers. It was the tone, the energy, the symbolism. This new home wasn't designed for a royal couple raising 2 small children. It was tailored for independence, for streamlined efficiency, for solo operations. Meghan's name alone was attached to the lease, a detail verified by multiple sources familiar with the transaction. There were no signs of Harry having any involvement in the purchase or design. Neighbors described quiet move-ins, short daily visits by Meghan's staff, and a fleet of SUVs coming and going, not in chaos, but in deliberate, clockwork fashion. No Harry, no children playing in the yard, no late-night family walks. It was quiet, composed, controlled, and it spoke volumes. Inside the house, according to a source close to Meghan, the vibe was distinctly different from Montecito. Gone were the Tuscan stone walls, the elaborate gardens, and rustic luxury. In their place were Scandinavian-inspired interiors, clean lines, muted colors, curated art, and intentional lighting. Every room, the source said, felt like it had been designed not for comfort alone, but for filming, meetings, productivity. In other words, this wasn't just a home. It was a headquarters. This shift is telling, especially considering the stage Meghan now finds herself in. After years of backlash, misrepresentation, and media battles, she seems to have taken full ownership of her image. No more joint statements. No more coordinated couple appearances. This new residence marked the beginning of Meghan 2.0, a woman no longer navigating her public identity through marriage, but forging one fully on her own. Insiders say the house features a dedicated media room, a podcasting space, and a high-tech home office where she conducts remote meetings with partners and producers. There's also a yoga studio and a minimalist nursery, though it's not clear whether Archie and Lilibet have been living there full-time. According to some close to the situation, Meghan and Harry may now be co-parenting in a manner that resembles physical separation, with arrangements still fluid and evolving. Still, the symbolism is hard to ignore. Meghan's decision to move alone into a space customized for her needs points to more than just practicality. It hints at emotional realignment, at a future where her path, goals, and personal identity are no longer necessarily intertwined with her husband's. Observers have drawn parallels between this move and other famous Hollywood separations. The quiet stepping away, the subtle planting of flags in different territories, and the shift in tone from us to me. And though Meghan has made no public statements about the move, her actions speak loudly. From launching new solo business ventures to holding public events without Harry by her side, the message is increasingly clear. This new home is not a temporary pause. It's a purposeful pivot. Yet, for all the speculation, Meghan herself has remained poised, unapologetic, focused. Friends say she's found peace in this space, that the noise of public life has finally dulled behind the thick, soundproof windows of her new home, that she's waking up early, meditating, journaling, and planning what comes next. That this move, while painful in what it signifies, is also empowering. And what of Harry? The prince was noticeably absent from the property unveiling. There were no moving trucks following him to the same destination. No joint sightings in the neighborhood. He has been reportedly spending more time in the UK, attending to various legal matters, visiting familiar faces, and possibly exploring long-term options for re-establishing some connection with his homeland. Some insiders even suggest he's considering purchasing a residence near Windsor, not to rekindle ties with the royal family necessarily, but to give his children a place to connect with their heritage when the time is right. Meanwhile, Meghan's focus has remained on building her brand, building her network, and now, building her home, a space free from compromise, shaped solely by her own hands. It's worth asking what this house represents emotionally. Is it a home of healing, a fortress of solitude, or a symbol of liberation? The answer might be all three. For a woman who has long been criticized, mischaracterized, and dissected by the world, this move could be her most powerful statement yet. Not in words, but in walls. The house isn't extravagant by celebrity standards. It doesn't scream wealth or scream for attention. It whispers control, independence, clarity. It is, in many ways, the kind of home you choose when you're done explaining yourself. When you're ready to live, not perform. Of course, there are lingering questions. Will Harry ever live there? Was he invited? Is this a trial separation, or the quiet start of something permanent? No one knows for sure. But the fact that Meghan made this move decisively, publicly, and alone suggests that she is not waiting for answers. She is making them. And for the public, so used to seeing Meghan as half of a duo, this solo chapter may take some getting used to. But for Meghan, it seems, the chapter has already begun. The boxes are unpacked, the furniture arranged, the door, at least for now, closed to the world. What lies behind that door is a mystery. But one thing is clear. The Montecito dream is over. And in its place stands a new dream, quieter, sharper, and shaped by a woman who's no longer waiting to be understood. No marriage breaks apart in one day. Even the most dramatic separations are rarely the result of a single moment. They're the culmination of years, a slow collection of unmet needs, unspoken resentments, and tiny, daily misalignments that one day become too heavy to carry. But every unraveling has its catalyst, a flashpoint, a moment when the underlying fractures finally split wide open. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, those close to the couple believe that moment came not in front of cameras, but behind tightly shut doors during what insiders now refer to as the last fight. The incident, still shrouded in secrecy and conflicting reports, allegedly took place just weeks before Meghan began the moving process from the Montecito estate. Though the exact details remain unconfirmed, sources suggest that the argument was not about one issue, but rather the boiling over of many. All the things left unsaid for too long. It reportedly started with a conversation about Archie and Lilibet. As the children grew older, so did the stakes of where and how they would be raised. Meghan, ever the strategist, had concrete plans. She wanted them enrolled in elite Los Angeles schools, immersed in progressive, multicultural environments, and positioned to thrive in the world she knew, a world of influence, education, and modern values. Harry, on the other hand, had grown increasingly concerned about their exposure. He reportedly felt they needed grounding, time in the UK, interaction with his side of the family, even if limited. He saw value in them knowing where they came from, in forming some connection with their royal heritage. That disagreement wasn't new. They'd debated it before, but this time, it escalated. Insiders claim that Harry brought up something that cut deep. He questioned whether Meghan had ever truly wanted to make their life work outside the palace as a couple, or if her plan had always been to build an individual legacy that just happened to launch from their exit. He reportedly expressed feeling sidelined, voicing concerns that their family unit had become Meghan's brand platform rather than a shared foundation. The accusation wasn't shouted, but it stung. Meghan, known for her composure, didn't react with fury. She responded with cold clarity. She allegedly told Harry that she could no longer continue in a marriage where she felt she was dragging him toward ambition, that she had spent years shielding him, advocating for him, fighting for him, only to feel like he was resisting the very life they'd sacrificed so much to create. From there, the conversation spiraled. Old wounds reopened. Harry brought up the isolation he felt in California, his sense of being disconnected, not just from his roots, but from his purpose. Meghan countered with the sacrifices she had made, the vicious press attacks, the smear campaigns, the abandonment by her own family, all for choosing him. They weren't screaming. That wasn't their style. But neighbors claimed to have heard raised voices that night. A tone not of anger, but of heartbreak. A confrontation layered in exhaustion. According to a nearby source familiar with the estate's security, the couple had an unusually long meeting with their legal and financial teams the following morning. Staff who had worked closely with them said the energy shifted noticeably after that. The house grew quieter. Schedules became more rigid. Communication became formal. And then, in the days that followed, Meghan began overseeing consultations with real estate agents. Some accounts suggest that Meghan had already been considering a new place prior to the argument, but that the fight sealed the decision. It was no longer a hypothetical shift. It became a mission, not in haste, but in absolute finality. Friends who spoke with her afterward said she sounded resolute, not angry, not vindictive, but done. Harry, meanwhile, reportedly left for a series of pre-planned engagements shortly after the confrontation. He attended a veterans event alone, spoke briefly to reporters, then disappeared from public view for over a week. Some say he spent time at a friend's private estate near Lake Tahoe. Others believe he flew to London under the radar. Either way, he was absent from the house in the days that followed, the same days Meghan began coordinating the move. That absence, that silence, wasn't just logistical. It became the symbol of what they had become, two people with very different visions of how to heal, how to grow, and how to raise a family. For Harry, the house had still held some hope, a place where the kids could be safe, where maybe, if they could just slow down, they might find their rhythm again. But for Meghan, the house had become a burden, a space too big, too symbolic, too heavy with the weight of what they were trying to sustain. The last fight, as it came to be known among their inner circle, didn't involve betrayal. There was no infidelity, no third party, just the painful realization that love alone might not be enough. That commitment, when built on different dreams, can only stretch so far before it snaps. And this wasn't about ego. It was about identity. Harry had spent his life in one extreme, silenced, restricted, and watched. His move to America had been a rebellion. But as time passed, he struggled to feel rooted in the world Meghan thrived in. He didn't speak the language of producers, contracts, or influencers. He missed tradition, not because he wanted to return to it, but because it had once given him structure, meaning. Meghan, on the other hand, had never been more certain of who she was becoming. Her new home wasn't just a house. It was the next iteration of herself. She was rebranding, reimagining, owning her narrative in a way she'd been denied for years. That clarity, while empowering, came at a cost. After the fight, those who worked in their home noticed small changes. Separate routines became entirely separate schedules. Shared spaces became silent. Where laughter once filled the breakfast room, now there was silence and the sound of a coffee machine operated one person at a time. Their children, still shielded from the spotlight, were kept to routines, playtime, nap time, meals, but the joint parenting dynamic had begun to shift. The warmth of spontaneity, insiders said, had disappeared. What's striking is that the last fight wasn't an eruption. It was the long-awaited release of everything they hadn't said aloud. The fears, the disappointments, the buried truths. And perhaps, in that sense, it was less of a fight and more of a reckoning. In the days following, Meghan was seen more frequently in Los Angeles, appearing at events, taking meetings, and preparing her new residence. Harry was seen less. When he did appear, he was quieter, less animated, reflective. What remains unknown is whether that final confrontation was truly final, or if there are still lingering threads binding them together. But what is known, according to those closest to them, is that something shifted permanently that night. A line was crossed, not in anger, but in clarity. The love they had was real. That much everyone agrees on. But love, when held too tightly to the past, can sometimes become the very thing that keeps you from growing. And in their case, it appears that growth had begun to happen in opposite directions. What comes next is uncertain. A formal announcement? A quiet arrangement? Or perhaps just more silence? But the move has already happened. The house is sold. The boxes are packed. And whatever was said during that final conversation whatever truths were spoken or left hanging. They marked the end of an era. After years of exile from the royal fold, Prince Harry's name had become synonymous with rebellion. The prince who walked away from privilege, tradition, and the crown to carve out a new life on his own terms. But the sale of the Montecito mansion and Meghan's solo move raised a question that stunned observers. Is Harry now quietly planning a return? A homecoming? A rapprochement with the very institution he once vowed to leave behind? Whispers of Harry's secret UK plans began months before Meghan's move, but they gained momentum in the weeks following the Montecito sale. Unconfirmed reports from royal insiders suggested that Harry had made several discreet trips across the Atlantic, meeting with senior palace officials and close family members. These were not public appearances, but private, low-key meetings, closed doors far from prying eyes and cameras. The question on everyone's lips: why now? What would motivate a man who fought so hard to break free from royal constraints to reach out to the crown once again? To answer that, one must understand the complexity of Harry's relationship with his heritage. Unlike Meghan, who came from outside the royal world, Harry was born into it, raised under the weight of expectations, public scrutiny, and deep family traditions. His mother's tragic death left an indelible mark on him, shaping his view of the institution that surrounded him. And while his exit with Meghan was framed as a liberation, the ties to his homeland remained deep and complicated. Royal sources say that Harry's visits were part of ongoing conversations about how he could rebuild a connection with his family while maintaining his independence. These talks reportedly included discussions about Archie and Lilibet's future, ensuring that the children could have a foot in both worlds, even if their parents' relationship was fraying. A palace aide who wished to remain anonymous described the meetings as hopeful but cautious. They indicated that Harry expressed a desire for reconciliation, but on his terms. That he sought a middle ground, one that would allow him to protect his family from the media frenzy, while preserving a meaningful link to his heritage. Some royal watchers have speculated that Harry is considering a long-term residence in the UK, perhaps a countryside estate or a smaller, private home away from the glare of London's social scene. This would enable him to be closer to his grandmother, King Charles, and other family members, while also providing a stable environment for his children. Yet, this potential homecoming is fraught with challenges. The wounds between Harry and senior royals remain fresh. The public battles, the memoir revelations, and the media storms have created layers of mistrust. There is no certainty that the palace will fully welcome him back, at least not yet. At the same time, Harry's inner circle has reportedly warned him of the risks involved in any rapprochement. Some friends and advisors caution that returning to the royal fold could mean sacrificing the very independence he fought for, that the monarchy's structures are slow to change and often unforgiving. Despite this, Harry seems determined. In recent public appearances, he has hinted at a growing sense of nostalgia and a desire to reconnect with his roots. His interviews have featured more references to family, tradition, and legacy, topics he had previously avoided or criticized. One poignant moment came during a charity event in London. When asked about his hopes for the future, Harry spoke about wanting his children to understand their heritage, to know their history, and to feel connected to their grandparents. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable, signaling a yearning for belonging that transcends titles and media narratives. Whether this yearning will translate into a formal return or remain a private longing remains unclear. Some insiders speculate that Harry's approach is strategic, laying the groundwork for a gradual reintegration that doesn't compromise his values or autonomy. Others believe that Harry's move to potentially spend more time in the UK is tied to practical considerations. Legal battles, business ventures, and the evolving public perception of the monarchy all play a role. Proximity to key contacts and the ability to influence narratives could be factors as well. The public, meanwhile, watches closely, divided in opinion. Some see Harry's possible return as a hopeful sign, a prince finding peace and balance between duty and freedom. Others view it skeptically, worried that it could signal a retreat from the promises he made about modernizing the monarchy. But beyond the headlines, the emotional core of this chapter lies in Harry's personal struggle, the tension between two worlds he belongs to, yet feels alienated from both. As Meghan embraces a new life on the West Coast, Harry seems to be searching for a way home, not just to a place, but to a sense of self and family. This delicate balancing act is far from over. The coming months will likely reveal whether Harry's secret UK plans will blossom into a full return or remain a quietly held hope. Either way, they mark a turning point in the Sussex saga, a chapter of reconsideration, reconciliation, and the enduring pull of heritage. When Meghan Markle first entered the public eye, it was as an actress, a role she inhabited with grace and determination, gradually building a career through television and film. But when she married Prince Harry, her life transformed overnight from Hollywood hopeful to global duchess. The royal spotlight redefined her identity, imposing rules, traditions, and expectations that shaped not only her public image but also her personal life. Now, as she settles into a new home without Harry by her side, Meghan is embarking on yet another reinvention. This time, one that's fully her own, free from royal rules and the weight of tradition. Hollywood is a world of reinvention, of second acts and new narratives. For Meghan, returning to this ecosystem is both a homecoming and a rebirth. It's a chance to reclaim the parts of herself that were eclipsed by royal duties and media battles, and to shape a legacy on her own terms. And make no mistake, this reinvention is deliberate, strategic, and poised to change how the public sees her forever. Over the past year, Meghan has been quietly building an empire. Far from the palace corridors, she stepped into boardrooms, production studios, and creative spaces where decisions are made, stories are told, and influence is forged. With her new home serving as a hub, Meghan has focused on cultivating partnerships with major streaming platforms, talent agencies, and socially conscious brands that align with her values. One of the most significant shifts in Meghan's post-royal journey has been her move from in front of the camera to behind it. She's taken on roles as a producer and executive at media companies that emphasize storytelling with purpose, projects that elevate diverse voices, highlight social justice issues, and challenge the status quo. These endeavors not only reflect her passion for advocacy, but also position her as a creative force with control over narratives. Public appearances have also evolved. Instead of royal engagements dictated by protocol, Meghan's events are now centered around causes close to her heart. Whether it's speaking at women's leadership forums, supporting mental health initiatives, or attending film festivals, her presence is intentional and authentic. She projects confidence and control, embodying a woman who has reclaimed her voice. Friends and collaborators describe Meghan's transformation as striking. Where once she navigated the intense scrutiny of the press with caution, she now approaches her public life with boldness and clarity. She's more selective with her projects, ensuring alignment with her personal brand and values. Social media, once a source of relentless criticism, has become a platform for empowerment and connection. This reinvention is not without its challenges. Hollywood is notoriously fickle, and the media industry is still grappling with issues of race, gender, and power dynamics. Meghan, as a biracial woman and former royal, carries both the advantages and burdens of her unique position. But insiders say she's embracing these complexities head-on, using her platform to advocate for inclusivity and change. Her relationships within the industry have also shifted. Longtime friends from her acting days have reconnected, while new alliances with influential producers, directors, and activists have blossomed. Meghan is cultivating a circle that supports her vision, one that understands the pressures of public life and the importance of authenticity. The narrative of Meghan's Hollywood reinvention isn't just about career. It's deeply personal. It represents a reclaiming of identity after years of being defined by marriage, royal expectations, and media narratives. It's about a woman who refused to be confined by the roles others tried to assign her. Critics, of course, continue to weigh in. Some accuse Meghan of chasing fame or accuse her of abandoning her family. Others praise her courage and resilience. But through it all, Meghan remains focused on her mission, to live a life that reflects her values, talents, and dreams. Her new home is a physical manifestation of this mission. The space is designed to inspire creativity, foster productivity, and provide sanctuary. It's where she crafts scripts, hosts brainstorming sessions, and unwinds from the relentless pace of public life. It's also a safe haven for her and her children, protected from the invasive scrutiny that once dominated their lives. This reinvention also carries implications for her relationship with Harry. As Meghan builds her independent life, the dynamics between them inevitably shift. Friends suggest that while they remain committed to co-parenting, their personal trajectories are diverging, with Meghan's focused on public influence and Harry's on personal healing and heritage. For Meghan, Hollywood is more than a career. It's a stage for impact, a place where she can amplify stories that matter and shape cultural conversations. It's a world she understands deeply, having navigated its complexities long before royal titles came into play. Her journey back into Hollywood is both a return and a reinvention. She's not the actress who starred in Suits, nor is she merely a former duchess. She's a powerful hybrid, a woman who has weathered storms, shattered expectations, and now commands her narrative. As this new chapter unfolds, the world watches with anticipation. Will Meghan's Hollywood reinvention solidify her legacy? Can she balance personal fulfillment with public responsibility? And how will this transformation influence the future of the Sussex brand? One thing is certain, Meghan Markle's life without royal rules is a story still being written.